My name is Liz Kirchhoff, and I'm an adult services librarian at the Barrington Area Library. And I wanted to take a moment to thank you for joining us in our program this evening that's held in partnership with Chicago Living Corridors. Before we get started, I wanted to take just a moment to ask you all to mute your microphones and keep those muted during the presentation today. If you have questions, we would ask you to put those into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And we'll ask as many of those at the end as we can find time for. This program will be recorded, and I'll send out that recording to everyone who did register sometime next week. It's usually early-ish in the week, and you can rewatch parts of it if you'd like to do so. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce Carol Rice. Dedicated to conservation, Carol is the current president of Chicago Living Corridors. She's been active with the Wildflower Preservation and Propagation Committee since 1987. The WPPC is a founding organizational member of Chicago Living Corridors. She created the mentoring program, A Natural Garden in Your Yard, in 2005. She's also been involved with Citizens for Conservation that recently awarded her the William H. Miller Award, a special recognition for outstanding contribution to building awareness, educating, and training citizens towards improving the environment. Carol?
Thank you very much, Liz. And let me say how happy we are to be working with the Barrington Area Library. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to wish everybody a happy Earth Day. Next. Okay, showing is a map of the properties on the Chicago Living Corridors website. This view is of a static map, but if you go to the website, you can see an interactive map. The map now has over 3,200 properties and is the major accomplishment of Chicago Living Corridors. In Illinois, over 90% of the populated area is in private hands. Chicago Living Corridors' plan is to capture the enormous potential of the privately owned properties in the effort to create habitat corridors. Our idea is to interest local organizations whose members have quality native plantings on their properties, encourage them to map these properties and include this information on the area-wide map. The properties affiliated with each organization are identified by a separate color. Our website will also be a vehicle for directing interested individuals to local conservation organizations. Next, Peggy. Chicago Living Corridors is an umbrella organization that encompasses a number of local conservation organizations. Chicago Living Corridor was founded by the following: Citizens for Conservation, which is now 50 years old and is developing habitat corridors, a dynamic project to protect, restore, and expand native habitat. The Wildflower Preservation and Propagation Committee, founded about 35 years ago, that developed a mentoring program, A Natural Garden in Your Yard, in 2005, and has worked with about 275 property owners since its inception. The Conservation Foundation is a land and river protection organization founded in 1972. They initiated the Conservation at Home program, which has been very successful and counts over 2,000 properties. The program has been expanded to Conservation at School and Conservation at Work. Conservation at Home has been adopted by a number of other organizations, including Northern Cane Wild Ones, that is a founding organization. West Cook Wild Ones rounds out the list of our founders. The additional organizations listed are now member organizations and are displayed on the map, and the website provides information on all of these groups. And I'll just take a second to say, if you already have native habitat on your property and you're not affiliated, one way to get on the map is to join with one of these organizations and add your property to the number of dots they have on the map. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Peggy Simonson. who will talk to us about the wealth of possibilities for a native shade garden. Peggy is past president and is on the board of Citizens for Conservation and currently chair of the Community Education Committee. She is also a board member for Chicago Living Corridors. She has restored her wooded yard with over 200 species of native plants, which she enjoys when she's not traveling. She writes about her love of nature in her new book, Wandering the World, Experiences of an Adventure Traveler. And take it away, Peggy. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Carol, and thanks, Liz. I'm pleased to be here this evening with all of you. Thank you for coming and joining us. It's an appropriate thing to be doing on Earth Day, I think. We've got more things going on the weekend. Just wanted to start with a little bit of background. I have a wooded yard, and so I have tried as much as I can to find out which plants will work in the shade. I get really frustrated when I think of people having only hostas. There's so many possibilities, and I'm going to share a number of them with you tonight. I'm going to move through pretty quickly, but if you do have questions as we're going, just put them, as Liz said, put them in chat, and we'll get through them. I'm going to talk about various seasons. The previous slide was spring. This is fall. These are woodland sunflowers that are one of the few things that grow in the shade in the fall. There's a couple of others we'll be talking about as well. But when you're trying to, when you're wanting to create habitat, you're needing to pay attention to all of the seasons. So these are what we're going to cover tonight. There are some spring ephemerals. Those are some of the ones that are blooming right now, and really lovely, neat little plants. We'll also then move into some more of the spring blooming wildflowers that aren't necessarily ephemeral. They don't fade away. They stop blooming, but in some cases, most cases, the plant stays there all summer, and that might make a difference in your landscaping. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the spring blooming shrubs and trees. They're very definitely add to your habitat for the birds particularly, but also the pollinators. A little bit about ferns and grasses, and then get into the summer blooming shade plants. We all know the summer blooming sun plants, the prairie plants and some of the ones that are just common in our yards. But by the way, all of what I'm talking about tonight are native plants. So there's lots of other, the plants that you might be wanting to put in the shade. But and then we'll get into the late summer and fall blooming, and finally the fall shrubs and trees. So a lot of different kinds of plants to cover. When you're thinking about putting plants in the shade, you also need to think about what kind of conditions. Do you have dense shade or dappled shade? Makes a difference. Some plants will do fine in dappled shade, but don't want to be in dense shade. And then some of them, a lot of them like the spring sun, and because really right now, most of the big trees don't have their leaves on them. And so the plants that will be in the shade in the summer are actually in the sun right now, which helps them. And then how much moisture? The mesic, if you're not familiar with that word, is medium. Is it, do you have dry, medium, or wet shade? I end up having some wet shade along my stream, and that's a challenge sometimes to find the plants that grow there. What kind of soil do you have? Good organic soil, or do you have packed clay? It's going to make a difference. Some plants are toughies and they'll grow wherever you put them, and other ones want to be a little more tender and have tender loving care. And then are you looking to use landscape gardens? Do you want shade plants in a nice, neat little border or along the front of your house? Or are you wanting to expand your natural areas? And particularly if you've got some wooded area and you've gotten rid of, or you're going to get rid of the buckthorn, you're going to want to know, what can I put in its place that's going to help take over? So let's get started with the early spring. March and April right now is a great time to be talking about it. This picture is of bloodroot, and I'll talk a little bit more about it as we get into it. One of my favorite in the spring is the rue anemone. It's blooming right now. Most of the time you don't see big clumps like this. You might see just a little few of them that are in a little patch. I have them popping up here and there, and I don't know if you can see that on here. There's three anemone, three things called anemones. The rue anemone is a true anemonella, is its Latin name. Has a little kind of a fist-shaped leaf. Flowers are pretty similar. Not being able to use my marker. Oh, here you can see the flower a little bit more closely. Oh no, now we've moved into the spring beauty. This is a lovely one. And again, you're not necessarily going to see a big clump of this. I didn't have any spring beauty in my yard, and we were doing a plant rescue for Citizens for Conservation some years ago with permission from a piece of land that was going to have a shopping center built on it. And we dug up a number of the rue anemone for restoration at CFC, and there was one clump that we left behind because it was so full of garlic mustard. Our restoration director said, we don't want to deal with that. So I dug it up and brought it home and carefully picked out all of the little bits of garlic mustard that were growing in it. And now my whole hillside is sprinkled with the spring beauty. I planted the one clump, and it likes to spread its seeds around. Another spring one that's blooming right now is the toothwort. It too, a lot of these, instead of solid clumps, they will spread themselves around here and there. And I love that. It's good even in a landscape kind of an area. I have a little section along my front sidewalk that's going to have some annuals put in it later. That's about the only thing non-native plant I put in. And right now it's full of toothwort. And they're just, instead of a bare soil, it looks lovely. They're fine with like the frosts we had last night. They're good at that, but they die back. And so, after another month or so, that not only will the flowers be gone, but the leaves will be gone. And so, you can plant something else. This is another lovely little one. It's called Dutchman's britches, and you can see it's like an upside down pair of pants, and the nice little loose, almost fern-like leaf on it. It's a great one to plant. One of the advantages of some of these are all pretty common, were pretty common in our woodlands before everything got covered with grass and concrete. So if you have some natural areas on your property, and particularly if they've been covered with honeysuckle or buckthorn, which are totally invasive, if you leave it, you might find some of these things coming up. I did. When we moved in, my hillside was full of buckthorn, and we got it out, and the next spring, all great things. They've been hiding for years because they've been under these big buckthorns, but they come through. The trout lily is an interesting one. It has this sort of a speckled leaf, which is where the name trout comes from. They are hard to buy. Growers don't grow them because it takes 7 years for them to bloom. And so that's, there's not a quick payoff for their work. But once you have a few, they will spread themselves around a lot. And the pollinators love them. And especially this time of year, there's not a lot of other things blooming. So they go after these nice little ephemerals. These all die back. They go away after a little while. This is the sharp-lobed hepatica, and it'll be white. Sometimes it'll be a little bit lavender. Sometimes it's got a little bit of a pink tinge to it. But they are some of the first ones to come up. They've been blooming now ever since we had that warm weather in March. And the flowers last longer than in some, and then the flowers come first, and then the leaves come after that. So a very special one. And we do sell this one at our plant sale. Citizens for Conservation has a plant sale every year, the first week in May, but we are only doing an online sale this year, and we are literally sold out. So we aren't going to be able to have on-site sale, unfortunately.
Got that.
And here, these are the leaves of the hepatica. So you can see hepatica has to do with the liver, as in hepatitis, and apparently the people that named this thought this looked like it was shaped like the liver. That's where it got its strange name. But okay, now I want to tell you a little bit about the bloodroot. This one comes up. The leaves tend to be kind of shrouding the buds when they're coming out of the ground, and then the flowers pop out. And it's the one I had on the cover. It's a very lovely, lovely plant. Unfortunately, the flowers don't stay blooming very long. But an interesting fact about these, they are propagated by ants. I didn't know that to start with. I have a patch of these that were remnant way in the far back of my property, but they come up so early. I wanted to move some up closer to the house, and they do transplant easily. But I had them popping up here and there, and I didn't know that the seed is way too big to be blown by the wind. And then I learned about the bud, or I'm sorry, the seed pod, after the flowers are done, is about a ½ inch long. It's big for a little flower, but the seed is tiny inside, but it's wrapped in a pulp called iliosome. And apparently the ants love to eat the iliosome. So they go after the seed pods, eat the iliosome, and drop the seeds wherever they happen to be. And so they are propagating the bloodroot all over the yard, which is very nice of them. I can't do that. Okay, so now we're moving into the late spring a bit. All of the ones I was just talking about all die back, but there are nice woodland plants that don't, that you can continue to enjoy for a longer time. This is the woodland phlox, Phlox divaricata. Gets to be about 6 inches tall, and the flowers last quite a long time, and it's just very showy. I think it's one of my favorites. Some of the little spring ones are lovely little plants, like the anemone I showed you to start with, but it's so close to the ground, you kind of got to get up close to it to see it. But these stand up, and you can see them from a distance. I had shown you the rue anemone. Here's the wood anemone. Quite a different shape leaf to it, and it has the five petals on it, so you can tell there's also a false rue anemone. So we can get these closer. These leaves last most of the summer. If it gets dry in August or so, they'll die back. But it's not quite as ephemeral as some of those other ones. And you may know about the wild columbine. Sometimes it's this pinker color, and sometimes it's more scarlet. This is the one columbine that's native. You may see the blue one, the blue columbine, which is a pretty plant, but that's a Colorado native. In fact, it's the state flower of Colorado. Our columbine is this color, one of these colors. And the hummingbirds love it because, anytime there's a tube-shaped flower, of course, the hummingbirds want to get their proboscis up into them to get the nectar. This one grows, we were talking about what kind of soil. This will go almost anywhere. It's okay in sun, it's okay in shade, isn't fussy about the kind of soil. It'll spread better if it's got good soil, but it will come up and pop up, and it can form a nice clump, or the seeds can sprinkle around, and you can have it'll spread around a little bit, but it transplants well too. So if you want it in a bed, and it's popping up somewhere you don't want it, you can just move it. Here's the jack in the pulpit. The flower is kind of insignificant underneath here, but it gets this wonderful bunch of red berries toward the end of the summer. And so the leaves stay, they don't die back, and there's a very lovely plant. This is the pulpit. The jack is the spathum that's inside this, but that's where it gets its name. But then the petals around it die back, and the seeds come out. And really a nice showy. These, by the way, sometimes they're short like this one is, but I've had some get to be about 3 feet tall if they like the area, and fine with deep shade if that's what they like to be. This one, goat's beard, is more like a shrub. I mean, it gets to be a shrubby shape, about probably 3 feet tall and across. But it's not a shrub because it dies back completely. It's not woody. It dies back to the ground in the winter. But it has these nice sort of loose, fluffy flowers on it. So a little different than some of the other ones we were looking at. I need to get a better picture of ginger. I think this one has a little stick in it that isn't part of the, oops, didn't mean to do that. Wonderful ground cover. It's coming up now, and then it spreads nicely as a ground cover. You wouldn't use this as a specimen plant because it spreads, and it is a ground cover. It wants to spread. But if you have an area to fill in, I want to like under a tree, where it's so much better to have a ground cover than it is to have bare soil or even mulch. You know, when in the spring, when the nestlings, the baby birds are trying to fly, sometimes they fall out, and if they land on bare soil under the tree, they're prey. If you have a ground cover down there, they can hide a little bit. This one, the marsh marigold, it wants to be wet. I have it along my stream, and the stream has big trees around it, and so in the later summer it's shady, but right now the trees don't have leaves on them, so the sun gets to them and they're blooming. And then once the beautiful yellow flowers are done, these nice heart-shaped leaves stay, so there's a nice clump of a plant. It's somewhat conservative. It'll spread, but it won't go wild. I mean, it is wild, but it won't, you know, take over an area. Some of the things, you know, are more aggressive than others. This is a neat one. This is the wild hyacinth. You may know the cultivated hyacinths that are blooming now in pink and blue and various cultivated colors. The wild hyacinth is white, but it has this lovely stalk on it. These are the flowers, and these are the buds that are going to continue to open up. It's not open yet. It will be another, maybe more like mid-May when this one blooms. Has a fine little leaf. It doesn't make big masses. It pops up in nice little areas. One of the places if you are in the Barrington area and can get out to Baker's Lake. Baker's Lake is the savanna is owned by the village of Barrington, but Citizens for Conservation has been a steward for it since the 80s. And on the hills, there's a path that walks through it. On the hillside that goes from the savanna down to the lake edge, it's just a mass of these wild hyacinths in May. So if you get a chance, get yourself over there to go for a walk. It's short. It's not a strenuous walk at all. But right now, it's just the woodland is just solid with wildflowers. Coming up now also are the shooting stars. And they start out white, but as they age, the flowers turn a little bit pinker. Unfortunately, the deer like them. So if you have deer issues, I go out and as soon as they start coming up, I spray them with deer off, because otherwise they'll get chewed. They're too pretty and too special. These two will spread themselves through a whole field in some cases if they have an open space to. These are some that like sun, but also are fine and not dense shade, but the dappled shade, or now when the trees don't have shade on them. Here's the wild geranium. It is the one geranium that is a native. And it too is tough. It can grow almost anywhere. It's fine in sun, it's fine in shade. It grows in, I have some bad clay in some parts of my yard, and it's doing okay in that. Once again, it tends to not form as big a clump in the poorer soil, but it'll grow, and it sprinkles its seeds around, so you'll have it spread nicely. And it too is easy to transplant. So if if it comes up in a spot where you can't see it and you want to move it into a garden, that's a good thing to have. This one is rare, the golden seal. It's harder to find, but it's a really special plant. It's very conservative. You're not likely to run into it in the woods somewhere. It is a native, but there's just not many of them left around. But it has this nice white flower, and then the leaves last all summer. Now here, the Virginia waterleaf is a good ground cover. It's not low. This is, by the way, a jack-in-the-pulpit in the midst of it, but it spreads beautifully like a ground cover, and it has these wonderful white flowers on it. You can't see them, but they're almost like a bee balm. They're kind of a loose flower that the pollinators just love. And I let it just kind of go in some of the natural areas because it's not, you again, you wouldn't use it as one specimen plant because it's going to spread. It is a ground cover. But boy, if you're trying to expand planting and can get rid of some lawn, if you've got a lot of lawn up around your trees, I suggest you cut back you kill back the lawn, smother it probably with black plastic or with newspaper buried in soil, and create a bigger area of non-lawn. The Virginia waterleaf is a great plant to plant there. It will, cover that space. It's fine under the tree, and it'll support lots of pollinators. Here's another wetland plant, the blue flag iris. Lovely, lovely blooms. It's a little bit later. It's likely to be blooming maybe in, again, mid-May or so. I like it when I have it with the marsh marigolds, and I love to have the yellow marsh marigolds and the iris. And sometimes, depending on what the weather does, they might come up at the same, or be blooming at the same time. But this year, the marsh marigolds got started with that really warm weather we had a couple of weeks ago, and the irises are still coming. But they love to have their feet in the water. You can put them in a rain garden, but if you have the rain garden that dries out later in the summer, that's not for them. They're better off in a pond or along the edge of a stream or something. Here are the Virginia bluebells. If you've been around any natural areas this week, they're blooming up a storm. They're gorgeous. And they have that bell-shaped flower too that the pollinators love. And some of these early ones are really good to have in your yard because the pollinators are coming back or hatching and need to have their nectar and their pollen. So having some of these is a good one. This one, does die back. The flowers last quite a long time, depending on the weather. They're saying there's going to be an 80-degree day again next week, and if that unfortunately knocks off some of these early spring things because they're spring plants. They don't want it to be hot. But anyway, they make such a big clump, and the leaves die back completely after about a month, and consequently, it's good to plant them with something else that's coming up later. And I like to plant them with ferns because the ferns are late coming up and they're both fine in the shade. But this one, will be gone and leave bare spots if you don't have something to take its place. Here's that woodland phlox again. Had it earlier, but it's also one of the ones that lasts into the spring. Here's the mayapple. This is a flower. I turned the leaf upside down so you could see the little flower. Ordinarily, the flower is hidden under the leaves, but then it gets the big seed pod underneath it is the mayapple. And these tend to spread nicely into a large patch of them. Sometimes in the woods, you'll see big spreads of them in good woods that's been cleared of its buckthorn. They want a little bit better soil. They're not so good I've tried to move them into some of the clay spots and they don't like it there. They want to have the woodland soil instead. Here's another wonderful little plant. Jacob's ladder stays about maximum maybe 6 or so inches tall, blooms up a storm. This is a nice clump, but it'll drop its seeds, and so it'll come up here and there. So you can use it as a ground cover if you want, or you can use it as a specimen plant. It's likely to keep spreading, and also to add more little plants here and there. But as with so many of these things, they really transplant easily. So you can if it comes up where you don't want it, you can move it to somewhere where it can just spread itself. I hope some of you are creating some natural areas so it's nice to have a very landscape look, and these plants do fine, many of them in that setting, but it's also fun to let them naturalize. Here's a celandine poppy. There are a couple of these the poppies. This is the only these native ones are the celandines. They are sometimes considered too aggressive. I haven't found that, but these are ones that are growing in my clay soil and doing fine. They make a nice clump and they spread around a little bit, but if they're in really good woodland soil, you'll have a whole hillside of them or something, which is lovely if you're just trying to get something to naturalize. Some people say they get too aggressive and they have to take them out. And then there's all sorts of trillium. This one is rare. This is, I don't find it ill-scented, but that's its common name. It's called erectum because the stalk, you can't see it here, but the stalk comes up about an inch from the, oh, maybe you can kind of tell it here, from the leaves. So the leaves have the trillium, and the petals are 3. But it stands up a little taller. This you're not likely to just to run into this because it's been so eaten by the deer, unfortunately, in our forest preserves and places. This is another of the trillium, just considered a white trillium. This is not the grandiflorum. This is it's got kind of a spiky flower shape to it, but still the 3 leaves and the 3 petals on the flower. And then this is the large white trillium, the Trillium grandiflorum, that is just a spectacular plant, but unfortunately it's candy for the deer. And so when I first, I got mine, my brother had a cabin in Minnesota where this is native as well, and they were widening the road. So we were digging the plants that were going to get buried by the road, and I brought them home. I didn't have any in the yard, and planted them in the late summer. And the next spring, I was so excited to see them coming up. And I went out one morning to see if the flowers had opened, and the deer had eaten every single piece of them. The only thing left were this skinny little stem, and they'd eaten all the leaves and all the flowers. So I left them, and they've come back up since in the area, not all in the same spot. But now as soon as they start coming up, and it'll be another couple of weeks before you see anything coming out of the ground, I go out and put little wire cages over them so that they get protected, because they're just too beautiful. But unfortunately, the big patches of these that used to be in our forest preserves are all gone because our deer are so overpopulated that they're eating everything in sight. And here's a yellow trillium. This is all the flower you get out of it. It's just kind of a closed point like the red trillium, but just interesting to have a different one. And this is the one we see most commonly around, the Trillium recurvatum, because the leaves turn back. So that's where their name comes from. It's also called a red trillium or a prairie trillium. I'm not sure why prairie, because it is a shade plant, but it grows fine in some of the sun too. And I haven't had the deer eat this quite so much as they did the white trillium. And it pops up here and there and then makes nice little patches. So it's a lovely one. If you don't have any of those, look for them sometime when you're buying native plants. This one is also coming up now, but its leaves last all summer as well. The marybells, or the bellwort. Uvularia. Again, the pollinators love to get up inside this cone-shaped flower where they can get into the pollen and the nectar. So a lovely plant, and it stays sort of dainty like this. I mean, you might get nice little clumps of it, but it's not going to be aggressive. And then there's the downy yellow violets. The regular violet, the purple violet, is a native as well, but you may know that because it's quite aggressive. I mean, it'll get into your lawn and all over the place, which is okay. I think I let it, and the lawnmower cuts it down. It's not so sad because it's also in the beds. This one's a little more reserved. And if you have a spot, that where you'll see it, so it won't get engulfed by big plants, it's a good one to have. And the downy is it's just little sort of little hairs on the flower, which make it pubescent. Okay, moving on to ferns. How are we doing for time? We got to move fast. I packed a lot into this program, so I might reiterate what Liz said, and that the program's being recorded. So if I'm moving too fast and you don't try to take notes on everything, you can go back and take a look at some of these afterward. This particular photo is of my maidenhair ferns. That's my favorite. I just love the daintiness of it and the shape of it. It's a little different than some of the other ferns. But all of the ferns are good shade plants. So you can put them thick in an area so that they become kind of a ground cover, or you can use them more as a specimen in different areas. This is the royal fern. Gets a lot taller than the maidenhair, fills in a nice area in the shade. These are some of the ones that I put in along with the bluebells, so that when the bluebells have died back, the ferns are taking their place. The lady fern has a little different shape, a little more frond-like. Also gets taller, though it's a maybe 30 inches or so. So they'll fill in nicely in the woods. Or most of these are pretty well behaved. The one that isn't is the ostrich fern. That's a light one you're likely to see if you see ferns along the roadside or whatnot. It spreads a lot more. This little oak fern is really good in a wet shade area. This is the moss behind it or lichen that it's connected with. It's little. These little fronds are only maybe 3 or 4 inches. So if you have a wet spot in the shade, you might try to find some of the oak fern. It's a neat little one. The sensitive fern is called that because if you touch one of the leaflets on it, it'll curl up. So some say it's sensitive to temperature, but I know that you can test it by literally putting your finger on the middle of the frond. Here's the ostrich fern that gets bigger and spreads more. So if you have a spot for it, that's fine. But recognize that it's not. I don't think it's as pretty as landscapey as those others. And the problem with this one is if it gets dry in August, for example, it's likely to die back. It won't go away. I mean, it'll come up next spring, but I want my ferns still to be around in September. So in fact, most of these none of these native plants usually need to be watered once they're established, but I sometimes will water my maidenhair ferns just because I don't want them to die back before the end of the season. And this one is a cinnamon fern. It's named because its stalk looks like a stick of cinnamon. Again, a taller one, probably again 30 inches or so tall. So lots of ferns to choose from. This Christmas fern is unique because it's called Christmas fern because it stays green until it's buried in the snow. And even early in the spring, when the snow is melted, it'll have some green fronds on it. So if you don't want it to go away in September or October when we get the frost, Christmas fern's a great one to have. And it stays in this nice clump. So it can be a good landscape plant. All right, let's quickly talk about some of the spring flowering shrubs and trees. This is a redbud, which is a gorgeous tree. Oops, well, I'll come back to it later. The serviceberry is a lovely one to have in the spring. It's blooming right now. And then in the fall, it gets the berries that the birds love. So it's really a good habitat tree because they get the pollen and the nectar from it while it's flowering, and then have the berries later. So, and it's just a very nice tree to have in your landscape. Here's the redbud. This one's out in the full sun, but it is an understory tree. So if you're looking for a tree that flowers in the shade, it doesn't want to be deep in the woods, but right on the wood edge or in an area maybe by your house where it gets shaded in the afternoon, but it gets sun in the morning, it'll do fine. And it doesn't get huge, so it's a lovely landscape tree. And it like the serviceberry, it's good because it's blooming now at a time when the birds are wanting to find some places to nest, and the pollinators are looking for their pollen. So it's out before a lot of other things are. The pagoda dogwood is another neat one. It has these fronting, spreading out branches like this. Really a good shade tree or shrub, basically. It can get to be, I don't know, probably 10, 15 feet tall. It's not a big tree, but it really is a nice shrub and good for the shade. The downy hawthorn is another one. Can take some shade and is a very nice landscape tree, well behaved. Of the hydrangeas, you know about Annabelle or something that is a cultivar. The smooth hydrangea is this one. Gets the nice white flowers on it. These are not quite blooming yet. They're just getting out. Stays more behaved than I understand people with the other hydrangea, with the cultivars. But the neat thing is, I had some of the regular hydrangeas in the yard when I moved in, and I planted the native hydrangeas sort of along the same edge of the driveway. And the bees will come to the native hydrangeas, but you don't see them ever on the cultivars. So they've lost whatever the value is that the native insects want from these. So plant the native hydrangeas if you're going to plant hydrangeas. I have just learned, I thought the oak leaf hydrangea was native just sort of south of the Chicago area. It's such a neat shrub that I like it, but I've been told that it really is. It's not even in the Chicago area. I had to go look it up in our Swinken Wilhelm is the Bible of what grows and what was originally in the Chicago area. So I maybe should take it out of here because it is a native shrub. It's just not native to the Chicago area, but it has these beautiful white flowers on it in the summer. Here's the 9-bark, another nice, good-sized shrub that has both the blooms in the spring and the berries in the fall, so a great one to add. The wild black cherry, I've tried that in the shade, and it lived, but it was pretty scrawny. So you'd put this one in an area where it's got again, maybe out on the edge of the wooded area or out with a little more sun. Of the roses, there's the multiflora rose, which is an invasive, a non-native that just takes over the wooded areas or anywhere it can grow. And it's wild, it's just awful. You can't even go bend down to cut the stalks of it because you'll get caught. So you have to cut the ends off first and then cut them down. And I don't recommend herbiciding very often, but with the buckthorn and the Illinois rose, you have to, because it'll send up shoots all over the place. But this one is the Illinois rose. It's a native, and it grows again on the woodland edges. Unfortunately, the deer like it like they like all roses. So you need to either, put a wire around it or spray it with the deer off to keep them off of it if you have deer. Elderberry is interesting. It's happy in the sun. It's happy in the shade. It flowers profusely and gets wonderful berries that you can make jam out of it if you get the berries before the birds do, but the birds are going to be after it. And the stalks are kind of hollow, and so that's why one of the reasons it grows so fast. But butterflies and other things, I don't know if you know that the monarch is really the only butterfly that has that long migration that we know about. The other ones winter over in stalks, in stems of things, and so the elderberry serves that purpose as well. All right, let's get into the summer here quickly. I'm talking too much. The white baneberry is a lovely woodland plant. It's called doll's eyes because it's got these little white berries with a dot on the end. The flowers are just a little bit insignificant, but these berries are just make a real show in a nice medium, little small size shrub, about 2 feet or so, and a nice clump. There's also the red baneberry, which has these beautiful clumps of berries on them and makes a nice clump in and it very well behaved. So it's a good landscape plant as well. The wild leeks, I don't see the flower on them, but this year for the first time, I have a big patch of them that just keeps spreading. And I decided I would make vichyssoise, which is leeks and potatoes. And I dug them up. And the leek is about the size of a green onion you'd buy in the store. So I had to have a whole handful of them to equate one of a commercially bought leeks, but it was delicious. I love doing that. Here's a Canada anemone. This one gets tall and it blooms later in the summer. It gets to be a couple feet tall and can be a clump, or it can spread itself here, there, and everywhere. Not real aggressively, but and it's really nice because there's not a lot that blooms in the shade in midsummer, and this is one that does. One of the milkweeds, most of the milkweeds want to be in the sun, and the more sun, the better. But this poke milkweed grows better. They're all Asclepias, but this one grows a bit better in the shade. It's a little harder to find. It's not as common as the common milkweed, of course, but just keep it in mind if you're thinking about wanting to get a milkweed in the shade somewhere. Also, the tall green milkweed is that. And here we have a caterpillar, monarch caterpillar on it with on the green milkweed. So a little bit of shade, it can like some sun as well. The tall bellflower is a native that pops itself up here and there. Fine, again, one of the few that grows in the blooms in the summer. So nice to have that. Here's the blue cohosh. It's more of a, it's shrub-like. Again, it dies back completely. But again, the flowers aren't spectacular, but it gets these clumps of blue berries on it. And it's a very nicely behaved, nice landscape plant. Lovely in the shade. And then one of the few vines, native vines, that grows in the shade is the virgin bower. It's the only native clematis. And it gets these lovely flowers on it, and the pollinators just swarm on it. They love it. And this is a little up close of the flowers. Viney, so it needs a trellis or a fence or something to grow on. And here's the purple Joe Pye. There's two Joe Pyes. One of them, well, there's several eupatoriums, but the purple Joe Pye is a little bit better in the shade. The spotted Joe Pye wants full sun. But the warning here, this gets really tall. So it's not likely to be one that you'd have, by your front walk or something. It can look weedy to people who don't know better. But if you have a natural area or an area back in, under the trees somewhere, it's a great one because it's fine in the shade. Come on. The blue lobelia is likes to be. It's a great rain garden plant. It likes to be a little bit wet. It can be dry part of the time. It doesn't need to be in the water, but it blooms again in the summer. So another one it's fine with some sun, but as long as it's wet, and if it's shadier, it can last longer without being moist. But again, a nice one that blooms maybe late July or August. And the white beard's tongue is another one. The penstemon grows along with, it gets to be, I don't know, a couple feet tall or so, but another summer bloomer. And again, it's a cone shape, and so the pollinators like to get down inside those kinds of flowers. You probably know about Solomon seal. It's pretty prevalent around. Solomon seal is the one that has the berries will turn blue under the stem, whereas I'm going to get over. Here's the false Solomon seal, which has the red berries on the end of the stem, the white flowers, and then the red berries. So I'm going to go back to the difference between the Solomon seal and the white and the false Solomon seal. This woodland knotweed, you probably won't want to plant it, but if it comes up in your yard, if you see it, recognize it. It's a native, it's pretty aggressive. It makes a very nice ground cover if you have a space that you need to fill in, but it is aggressive, and so it'll pop itself here and there. I didn't know it before, but it volunteered in my yard, and so now I like it. It has these nice little branching arches of its seed listing on there, and so obviously it's spreading seeds pretty easily around. Here's a native sedum. Most of the sedums I don't know of any other native sedum. This is a sedum ternatum, stays low, very close to the ground, and spreads with these nice little white flowers on it. So it's good for a little border or edging in a bed. Again, a shade. Okay, here's the false Solomon seal. And then here's the third one that goes by the common name of Solomon seal. This is stays a little bit smaller. Oh, by the way, the deer love the Solomon seal, but the deer don't eat my starry Solomon seal. I don't know why. And I hesitate to say they won't eat it, but I've been able to grow these better. The Solomon seal gets eaten. But when you have a patch of these, they're really very pretty because these little white starry flowers are spreading around in the whole bed. It's very attractive. Golden Alexander is another one that can, there's another zizia that wants to be full sun, but this one is okay in the shade. It's a nice, under higher trees where it's got a little bit of light, but can be shade plant. And it grows, it's a little earlier than some of those others. It's likely to be blooming in June. Now we're getting into the late summer and fall. Paying attention. Oops, got to move quickly here. Make sure you have some kind of asters in your yard. If you have sun, you can have the heath aster or some of the others, because the migrating monarchs need the milkweed in the spring to lay their eggs, but they have to have some source of pollen, or rather nectar, in September or October before they migrate back, and the asters do that. This aster forcatus, forked aster, grows in the shade. There's lots of them that grow in the sun, but these are a couple that will do better in the shade. And so you'll have something blooming with pollen for the migrating monarchs. The woodland sunflower was the one I showed you at the beginning that had, spread itself through. I have the natural area on the side of my yard, and these just spread themselves through. They spread by runners, rhizomes. So if they get in a place I don't want them, I can pull them out easily. But most of the other spring things in one bed have died back. The spring earlier ephemerals, and so these are nice to have, and they bloom again later, like September, late August to September, and can be very showy in the woods at that time. The woodbine, the Virginia creeper, is a great vine that gets this lovely color in the fall, and birds and things go after the seeds on the stalks. If you have English ivy somewhere, take it out and let the woodbine come in. It serves the same purpose, but this one also has habitat value. Of the goldenrods, most of them want to be full sun, but the blue-stemmed goldenrod is fine in some shade. And by the way, and so is the zigzag goldenrod. These are the two goldenrods that do well in the shade. And don't be afraid of goldenrod. People think that causes hay fever, but the myth got started because the goldenrods bloom at the same time as the ragweed has its pollen being spread out. And I know, because I'm allergic to ragweed, but I'm not allergic to my goldenrods. And then this is the elm leaf goldenrod. We have stopped selling that at our plant sale because it's very aggressive. I let it be in my yard, and so in the fall, I have big patches of it. But so I'm showing it. So if you see it, if you have it, it's not bad. It's just really aggressive. And so it is a native, as all the goldenrods, I think all the goldenrods are. But it's pretty in the fall. Real quickly, a little bit about the sedges and grasses. There are sedges that are very good for the shade. I have this one in my shady rain garden, and I love it. The burrs are like little medieval maces, a little circle with these little spikes coming out. And of course, the common one for shade is the pen sedge. It's also called the oak sedge because it grows naturally under oaks. So it's a great one. If you want to just fill in some, I have some spaces that when my trees have gotten big, the grass is just really not doing well at all. And in many cases, I'm replacing it with the sedges. They don't get any taller than this. They don't need to be mowed, but you can walk on it. you know, it stays a little bit more in clumps than a lawn grass. But if you need to replace some grass, this is a good one. If you, here's another one that's like, this isn't any bigger than the pen sedge, but I like this one because it's got this cute little flower stalk that has the little seeds on it. There are some sedges also, like here's the long beak sedge. It gets a little taller. It's not so much a ground cover as it is a, maybe a couple feet taller. So, but nice seeds for the critters. And the silky wild rye is a neat one with a pretty stem on it. Bottlebrush grass is another one that is a good woodland shade plant. I made the mistake of putting the northern sea oats in an area that I was hoping, I wanted it to be in some nice clumps, and it's very aggressive. I would not do that again. But on the other hand, if you have an area where you've cleared of buckthorn and you want something to be able to grow there, you know, just to fill in the space and keep the buckthorn from coming back, this would be a good plant for it because it's fine in the shade. All right, real quickly, some fall shrub and tree color. We have to talk about that. This is a picture of the hickories, now I'm blanking on bitternut hickories in my yard. I have the shagbarks as well, but the bitternuts get this wonderful gold color. Now, sometimes hickories you say that they should be in the sun, but these get some sun, but they're so close together that they shade each other. And of course, the sugar maple, beautiful, beautiful fall colors. And a blue beech, nice shaped, not huge, but a lovely tree, and it can do okay in some shade. A lot of the trees, most of the oaks want to be more sun, but I have white oaks, and again, I didn't plant them. They planted themselves 100 years ago or whenever, and they came up close together, so they're a whole lot skinnier because they don't have room to spread out. But if you're planting oaks, you want to probably do them in more sun. Here's the bitternut hickory. And of course, the hickories get the wonderful nuts on them that the squirrels love, but so do the other critters all winter. The gray dogwood is a great little plant. In fact, you might, if you've got buckthorn and you're trying to get rid of it, be careful that you don't take out the gray dogwood. If you compare them side by side, you can tell the difference. But these pop up in the wooded areas on their own, but have that wonderful, nice berry for the birds in the fall. Spice bush is another one that grows very nicely in the shade. Beautiful fall color, gets these nice red berries, and the deer don't eat it, or at least they haven't eaten mine. If you're looking for a tulip tree, be sure you buy, I mean, if you're seeing tulip tree, be sure you buy it by its Latin name, because there's other things called tulip trees that aren't native. But the Liriodendron tulipifera is this, and it has the nice big white flowers on it in the spring as well. And the ironwood is a good, not too huge tree that will grow in the shade. And of the oaks, the red oak can do so. Again, it won't get as big or as broad as if it's in the sun, but it's such a pretty fall color. Here's the black currant, the elderberry. You can see how many berries there are. The birds will get them, or you can pick them and make jam if you have a mind to. And then the snowberries. The winterberry has red berries and needs sun, whereas the snowberry can be in some shade. And but it's you need to have male and female plants. So if you're buying it, don't just buy one, buy 3 or more. I have a group of 5 of them to make sure that I had a female in amongst them to get the berries on it. And the viburnums. Now, mostly the viburnums want to be in some sun, but boy, they can be lovely in the fall with the fall color, and of course the flowers in the spring as well. So again, if you're doing a hedge, there might be some shade, but some sun, they'll be good. The maple leaf viburnum is the best one for shade. It stays a little smaller, but it has this wonderful color in the fall as well. I lost some of my viburnums to the viburnum borer in the last couple of years, but the maple leaf seemed to be resistant to it. Thank heavens, some of those managed. So this is my backyard. This is the wild ginger that I planted around the edges. This is that northern sea oats that, I mean, yes, the northern sea oats that's gotten too big for its britches here. But there's ferns back here. This is a black cohosh that's a shade plant I didn't have specifying in there. And in the spring, this is full of trillium and woodland phlox. And this is a blue cohosh in here. And then the ferns come in. They're being hidden by the northern sea oats here. So these are the folks that have taken these photos. If you're looking for photos of plants, on the Citizens for Conservation website, click on the plant list button and you'll see photos of lots of plants. And it also has the descriptions of the kind of environment they need, whether sun or shade, and what they look like, and how big they get and so forth. So that's a good resource. Oops, we don't have our plant sale this year. Pay attention to it for next year. It'll come back.
And I wanted to invite all of you to plan to join us next month for our webinar on seed sharing. We have a seed library. Do you know that the Barrington Library has a seed library? And this will be a wonderful opportunity to learn about seed libraries. It's a growing phenomenon. Seed terminology and seed saving. We actually have a couple of webinars in this section of the year on seeds, because seeds are where it all starts. I mean, obviously, you're buying plants to put in your garden very often, but those plants had to start from seed. And our own Liz Kirchhoff is going to be participating in the webinar along with Carolina Shotland, who has a seed library. Now, she doesn't have it, but she's very much involved with the seed library in the Round Lake Area Garden Club and in the library. And they do a seed expo. They didn't do it this year because of COVID, but this is a photograph that was taken at the seed expo last year. And the volunteers in the garden club put together a wonderful detailed information piece on every packet. So I believe that Liz will be sending out information that you'll be able to sign up for the May 27th webinar.